Hi there, welcome to another installment of Cooking with Genjamin. This time around what we're going to be doing is I'll be doing a bread that I've been meaning to do for quite some time. It just is a lot of work and it takes a lot of time, so but I figured it's time to get going. This is what is typically referred to as rustic bread, though I generally refer to it as like a French bread loaf. But it's a recipe that is adapted from, it's a gluten-free recipe that's adapted from a regular bread recipe. So it's something I'm still working on perfecting, but have gotten better over time, and it's to the point where I feel like it's actually safe to share. So how this recipe starts out is with an overnight starter. This will be a pretty quick thing to throw together, but that overnight starter has to sit, as one would expect, overnight. And it's good for 12 to 24 hours, so you need to let it sit for at least 12 hours while it rises, and then try to use it before it gets too old. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. There's just a few ingredients that are required to start off. So first, we have 1 1/4 cup of water, a cup of flour, and this is again the gluten-free flour that we've used in all of our other recipes, that the mixture that we've used that isn't a King Arthur, it's not the King Arthur's mixture, it's the baking-free mixture. We have a lot to actually go through, and this uses like 2 pounds of flour, so that's reason number 2 why we really need to do this recipe. Now we need to give the yeast, which I'll be putting in last, we need to give the yeast some food, because gluten-free flours, they have less for yeast to work with, and so we need to add a little bit more extra. So the original recipe calls for just like a ½ teaspoon of sugar. I'm going to use some honey, but I like to throw in a ½ teaspoon of fruit pectin, because the gluten-free flours don't provide as much food to the yeast. So if we don't do that, the yeast it's not going to expand as much, and so our bread is going to be more dense. It is already, even with this, it's still going to be more dense than you will get with a regular recipe using regular flour, but this does actually do a pretty good job of helping it. So I'm going to put in a ½ teaspoon here of fruit pectin. And you can usually pick this up at like the canning section of your local grocery store. Smaller ones may not have it. The canning section usually isn't super large, so it might take a little bit of exploration to find. Those are the cats in the background. Go ahead and add that in there. We're going to have 2 1/4 teaspoons of dry yeast. What I do is I just pick up a nice big bottle of this. You can get the packets that are individually wrapped. They're usually, I think, about 1/4 ounce each. I like going with this larger one because you just throw it in the freezer and it's good for a couple of years, 2-3 years usually. So let's go ahead and get this one opened. So we have 2 1/4 teaspoons. So we're ending with the wet ingredient here, which is the honey. Like I said, the recipe does call for a ½ teaspoon of sugar. That's usually what I normally do, but I thought I'd give honey a try this time around just to see if it turned out any differently. The last time we made the garlic, herb, and cheese bread, actually not the last video, but we've made it a couple times since we made that video. And the last time I made it, I used honey instead of the agave nectar, and ooh, did that make a difference in flavor. So hopefully, this is just a little bit, but we'll see if this makes any difference at all. So this is a little bit of an experiment. So now that we have all of this, we really just need to mix it together. And make sure it's very thoroughly mixed. Put a little whisk here.
Oh, you fill my lungs with sweetness, and you fill my head with you. Shall I write it in a letter? Shall I try to get it down?
So really, for the overnight starter, this is it. It's very simple. It doesn't take very long to throw together, and then once it's done, it sits for a while. So as you can see, just to kind of a reference, this is about where it's at. In about 12 hours, we expect it to be about almost twice as high. So that's how we'll know we're in a good position to get the next part started. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sit overnight, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. All right, and we are back. I have let the overnight starter rise overnight. It's been a little, I'd say about 16 hours since I did this, so it's more than ready to go. And then what I have here is 2 pounds of bread flour and a tablespoon of salt, and I just use table salt. So when you're measuring this out, I highly suggest using a kitchen scale. Makes a huge difference because 2 pounds is usually about 7 cups, but especially for gluten-free flour, the weight kind of changes depending on the type of flour you're using or the type of flour mixture you're using. So you really want to make sure that you have a scale. Like, definitely doing the scale is going to be more accurate than using the 7 cups. So try and get a cheap scale. They're usually about 20 bucks. You can maybe sometimes get them for 15. They're not expensive, but the scale makes a big difference, and measure out 2 pounds of flour. You have 2 cups of tepid water, so this should be a little bit warm, about room temperature is what you're looking for. We have 1/8 of a cup of olive oil, 3 tablespoons of milk, and then a tablespoon of honey. So this is our wet items that are going to go into our overnight starter here. So we'll just go ahead and do that. Now I chose to put a little bit more honey in this than, actually this is really the first time doing honey. So I chose to put honey in this as opposed to additional fruit pectin because I wanted to get a little bit of extra flavor in the bread itself, and I kind of feel that the honey does a really good job of working with this particular mixture of gluten-free flour. So it actually kind of, gluten-free flours can kind of have sometimes like more of an odder taste to them. This actually, the honey actually works really well with it. So I also then have a tablespoon of yeast here. So I highly suggest, if you can get one, using a metal spoon. And the reason why is when you're putting the yeast on there, it's actually so light that the static that you get from the plastic scoops actually tends to make the yeast just kind of flow around it, and so you can fill them, but then you end up losing a lot of yeast. So tablespoon of yeast, and what we're going to do here is we're going to slowly mix it into this mixture. We really want to have it be as evenly distributed as possible so we don't get it chunking up.
Oh, you fill my head with pieces of a song I can't get out. Can I be close to you?
Okay, so now that we have this all nicely mixed, we're just going to go ahead and throw it into our dry ingredients here, and then mix it really well. So ideally, if you have a KitchenAid mixer, you'll have a bread paddle. And if you have a bread paddle, then this job will be a whole lot easier for you than it will be for me. Because what you'll want to do is just kind of throw this mixture in, get that going, and let it mix for probably about 3 to 4 minutes using the bread paddle, and just make sure, yep, 3 to 4 minutes with the bread paddle, and just scraping the bowl often, making sure that the bread paddle is moving things around evenly. I do not have a bread paddle, so that means that I get to go ahead and do this by hand for a little bit longer than 3 to 4 minutes.
Can I be close to you? Ooh, ooh. Can I take you to a moment where the fields are painted gold and the trees are filled with memories of the feelings never told?
Okay, so been mixing this for a while now, and it's pretty evenly distributed. I'm not finding any more dry packets of flour at all. So one of the things that you'll notice about this is that this isn't like your typical bread flour. Typical bread flour, once it gets to nice and mixed, is pretty pliable and it's not really messy. This is going to be a bit more stringy and messy, and that's true for the normal recipe of this as well. Like, so if you're making the regular, excuse Shyla as she is drinking out of her water there. So if you're making the regular version of this, the non-gluten-free version, it is also going to be very stringy, so this is no different. But this is pretty typical for gluten-free flours in general when you're mixing them, that their consistency is very different than a normal flour. So the next thing we're going to do, now the normal recipe actually calls to let this rise for 4 to 6 hours, and then before you put it out into the pan. With gluten-free flours, however, they really only rise once. So unlike the normal recipe where you can put it in you let it rise, then you throw it in the pan, and it rises some more, with the gluten-free recipe, if you let it rise here and then move it, it's not going to rise anymore. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and put it into our French loaf pans, which look like this. You can see nice holes in there for making really good baking. Nice airflow. So we're going to go ahead and put them in this first. We're going to have parchment paper on here. We're going to divide it up first, and we're going to let it rise. So once it's on here, you also want to make sure it's covered. So I'm also going to be putting over like some saran wrap to help keep this covered and let the bread do its thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's going to be a long, messy process, so we'll pick up once it's ready to go in the oven. Okay, it's been about 5 hours, I'd say, since I set these outside to go ahead and rise, and they've done a pretty good job of that. So I'd actually say they look a little bit better than they normally would have had I mixed them first and let it rise in a larger bin and then put them out here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm preheating the oven to 500 degrees. And I'm actually, since it turned out really well last time, put some butter on the tops of this. Because it kind of helps keep in the moisture while it's continuing to rise here and when it gets in the oven. And I think it adds a nice browning to it. So go ahead and do that here real quick. And I did want to note one of the other things that I did, when I'm setting it aside to let the bread rise, I actually put it in a not too cool of a place, but a nice dry place, and that doesn't get too warm. So I actually put it in our furnace room because it's a little bit cooler in there, and it actually stays pretty dry. So what that does is it actually causes the bread to rise a little bit more slowly. So actually, in that sense, would recommend letting it rise closer to like 5 or 6 hours as opposed to 4. But it lets it rise a little bit more slowly, and because it does that, the air pockets that get created by the yeast tend to be a little bit stronger, and hopefully that will yield a better dough, a better product in the end. So we'll see how that turns out. Again, it's one of the things I did differently than normally this time around. But it all makes sense to me, so I'm not going to question it. Alright. Bread's nicely buttered at this point, so I'm going to let it finish rising. I'm going to recover it with saran wrap while the oven continues to heat. And once it's at 500 degrees, what we're going to do is I'm going to throw in 3 to 4 cubes of ice, and then throw in the bread, and then turn it down to 450. So the reason why we throw in the ice is it creates a nice little steam, and I think it kind of helps to make a little bit crispier of a crust. It works out really well, so I continue to do it. And so what we're going to do is turn it down to 450 degrees after we put the bread in, and then let it cook for about 14 minutes or so. For about 15 to 16 minutes. And then what I'll do is, once that time is up, I'll open the oven quick, and I'll just kind of pull on this parchment paper. You can kind of see I have two different parchment papers, so pull on each one to turn it over, and close the oven back up for another 15-16 minutes. Once it gets done, you want the bread to be about a little over 200 degrees. There's no eggs in it, so you don't have to worry about it being safe, but if it's under 200 degrees, it's going to be a little bit more moist and a little more tough. So once it's done, we should hopefully have a nice product. So I'm going to go ahead and let the oven finish warming up here, and then I'll throw the bread in, and we'll see you once it's done. Alright, we are back, and the bread is finished, and I've let it cool for a little bit over an hour here, about an hour and a half, and it is all finished up.
Hi!
That's Jenna's hand. So you can see here, it kind of turned out pretty well. It's nice and fluffy, a little springy, and yeah, and I assume pretty good.
It's tasty. It was pretty awesome.
That's pretty good. Yep.
I think the best part about this bread is its versatility. You know, it goes great with every kind of spread because it's just sort of a, I don't know, it's just kind of a nice soft flavor to it. So it goes great with peanut butter and with our honey pecan spread, and I think you put cheese on it and a bunch of other things. I mean, it's just wonderful. It's really, really cool. So
one of the things that we tried with the last batch was actually making little pizza things.
Oh, yeah.
So you just cut off a few slices, put some pizza sauce on there and some mozzarella cheese, bake in the oven until the mozzarella cheese is melted and browned, and it's super, super good. So I can see it turned out pretty well. And I would definitely say that this turned out better letting it rise in the pan as opposed to letting it rise in the bowl first and then transferring it to the pan. So I highly recommend doing it that way. Yeah, so that kind of concludes everything. It turned out really well. And yeah, good luck.
And the trees are filled with memories of the feelings never told.